Jamel Maurice Demons is better known to fans as YNW Melly, with the YNW standing for Young World, or Young New Wave, for a more PG audience. Unfortunately, like a lot of artists before him, the 24-year-old rapper has been no stranger to acts of violence and aggression. Now on trial for 2 counts of premeditated murder and facing the death penalty or life in prison without a possibility of parole, Melly's behavior in court has been concerning and a blueprint for what a psychopath rapper looks like in court. The trial and Melly's strange behavior. The first week of Melly's trial came to a close on the 16th, ending with the testimony of a registered nurse whose daughter is believed to be dating the rapper. That testimony turned out to be fodder for the defense to ask for a mistrial, claiming that the jury had been tainted by it. Over the course of the testimony, the witness had been treated as hostile. There were countless interruptions. She claimed to feel threatened and said that the state had ruined her life.
I don't feel comfortable.
Are you nervous?
I feel threatened.
Keeping all of this in mind, it was a fair assumption to make that the jury had been affected. Regardless, the judge denied the motion and the case carried on. Through all of this, though, it has been Melly's erratic and frankly disturbing behavior that has caught everyone's attention. On the 3rd day of trial, Melly was seen closing his eyes and praying to himself before muttering something and blowing a kiss to the people in the seated gallery. Most shocking is that the rapper doesn't seem even a little concerned about the fact that he is fighting for his life in court. His eyes are empty and his behavior appears to be making light of the entire situation. One of the victims, YNW Juvie's mother, noticed his actions and spoke with NBC Miami saying, "He did it a couple times. That wasn't his first time. I walked out because I don't, what you praying for? You sitting there like you ain't got no remorse. Like every time I walk in, you smiling. This ain't the time for that. This is sad. This case is serious." Juvie's aunt was also shocked at Melly's behavior, seeing as the rapper had grown up around them. She said, "This is somebody that we knew. It's somebody that we love. It's somebody that we trusted. Like we watched demons grow up. So this is a sad case. This is tragic. So we just praying for justice." It is possible that Melly's behavior was in response to the news he had received in the courtroom that day. A local firearms expert testified that a .40 caliber gun was used in the murders, but there is a slight problem. Despite having found bullet casings that probably came from the same gun, Florida law enforcement has not been able to locate the murder weapon yet, so the prosecution will need to use other evidence if they hope to get a conviction. Regardless, this strange behavior is no isolated incident. Not only did Melly blow kisses more than once, but he was also seen giggling and joking around with his lawyer like he did not have a care in the world. That's not all though. The day after Melly was seen blowing kisses, video footage saw him trying to make his way to a door clearly marked restricted area. But before he could walk through the door, he was noticed by security guards and told to return to his seat. Melly's behavior was weird to say the least, and again, it seemed like he was making a mockery of the entire trial. Obviously, Melly was not trying to make an escape, but his overall behavior has still been shocking. Somehow, there's more. On one of the days of the trial, as the courtroom cleared out, Melly was seen noticing someone in the gallery and mouthing the same words at them repeatedly, while getting increasingly agitated the entire time before turning to his lawyer. Even though hardly any time has passed since the trial began, loads of people online have noticed Melly's odd behavior. It is very possible that Melly is behaving the way he is because he knows the prosecution does not have much of a case against him. The defense was quick to point out that the prosecution has failed to come up with any concrete evidence tying Melly to the crime in its opening statement, saying, "And if after 4 years of investigation, the state comes and says, hey, he killed 2 of his best friends, and you're wondering why, and their answer is, I don't know," that's the first indication that they're just guessing and don't know what they're talking about. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is by itself reasonable doubt. Meanwhile, the prosecution has been trying to tie the deaths to gang-related activity. The defense has rebutted by stating that makes no sense because Melly was close friends with both victims. Things got interesting when a masked undercover detective took the stand. Despite claims that Melly was being robbed of the right to face his accuser, he was allowed to testify. Detective Danny Polo has received several unrelated death threats, so he was given permission to keep his face covered. Once he took the stand, Polo stated that Melly was a member of G-Shine, an offshoot of the Bloods, and that the rapper had hundreds of photos alongside members of the gang. Still, the link between the Bloods and the murders is unclear, so time will tell if it will come into play. As things stand, the main takeaway from the trial has been that YNW Melly's behavior is a matter of great concern. Looking back at some of his older interviews, which showed Melly believing himself to be extremely empathetic, his overall approach to going to prison, and his intense spirituality all portray a man making grand statements to possibly divert attention away from his lack of emotional connection. Despite the death penalty being a real possibility, the rapper has seemed disinterested and treated the entire trial like a joke. His actions have been strange, erratic, and completely disconnected from the reality of his situation. To some, it may even appear psychopathic, as he has shown a complete lack of remorse over the deaths of 2 people he grew up with. Raising demons. I think it is important to understand just where Melly comes from by taking a look at his youth and the formative experiences that ultimately played a huge role in building his personality. It may give some insight into his strange behavior in court, and it's also valuable to know the relationship he had with the victims. Melly was born in 1999 and grew up in Florida. Without his father in the picture, the future rapper and alleged murderer was raised only by his mother, Jamie Demons King. Demons King was just a freshman in high school when she gave birth. He was in a household where it was difficult to pay for just the bare essentials. But thankfully, Demons King had her mother to lean on for support. In an interview, she said, "My mother was trying to raise me, and then I had a baby. We were trying to raise that baby, and then I started working at Dunkin' Donuts. I was terrified." She also went on to say that when Melly was growing up, he had one Chris Brown CD, which he would listen to on a loop. Brown's sound would play a significant role in Melly's development as an artist himself, but I will get to that in a bit. Anyway, it wasn't long before Melly found himself headed down a dark path that sounded all too familiar when he joined the Bloods. This lines up perfectly with Detective Polo's testimony about the rapper's association with G-Shine and the Bloods. But at the same time, Melly had a fondness for music, idolizing the king of pop, Michael Jackson. In an interview, Melly even professed his love for the artist, saying, "He was perfect to me. I liked the way he carried himself, how humble he was, and the reaction people had towards him. I wanted people to have that same reaction when they saw me." Considering his love for Michael Jackson, it wasn't long before he tried his hand at music as well. Melly began uploading his music to SoundCloud when he was about 15 years old, and while he was building an online presence, he was doing the same thing offline as well, performing freestyles that showcased a clear adoration for Young Thug's style. As a matter of fact, Melly has stated that he views Chris Brown, Michael Jackson, and Lil Wayne as his key influences, but has been swayed by more contemporary artists as well. But for all his musical leanings, the thing about being a Blood is that regardless of how well life is going, trouble is never far behind. Back in 2015, Melly got involved in a high school shootout when he was still just 16 years old. Luckily, no one got hurt, but Melly was still convicted of 2 counts of aggravated assault, aggravated battery, and discharging a firearm in public. The fact that Melly didn't hurt anyone and was still a minor probably played a role in his sentence not being that severe. The rapper spent about a year in prison, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise because it gave him the time he needed to really focus on his songwriting. Melly came up with his hit single Murder on My Mind while he was in prison, a piano-heavy track that is raw, visceral, and picks at the young artist's dark psyche. The second verse of the song in particular raised a couple of red flags because it had the young artist go into a significant amount of detail while describing a murder. Of course, it had nothing to do with the crime that had landed him behind bars, but Melly contends that it was enough to have him back in prison for violating his probation, with the state attorney even reading out the lyrics in court. Melly's music. As I had mentioned earlier, being in prison really gave Melly the time he needed to focus on his music. While he was still behind bars, he released his first EP, Collect Call, which consisted of a total of 13 tracks but did not exactly set the world on fire, even if it did have a bunch of features from more well-known artists. The reason I want to take a beat and talk about Melly's music is that while the artist's most high-profile run-in with the law is being brought up on double murder charges, he had a couple of other issues as well. Secondly, I think it is important to understand just how well he was doing professionally when he made these personal choices, because it helps all of us see just how much he stands to lose. Alright, let's get back to it. For much of the first half of 2018, Melly focused on releasing singles like Virtual, Blue Balenciagas, Medium Fries, and Slang That Iron, which really stood out because Melly interpolated Chris Brown's Say Goodbye into the track. The strategy of dropping a bunch of singles paid off because a number of his music videos from around this time crossed well over 10 million views. In August of that year, Melly dropped his first mixtape, I Am You, which made it to the 192nd position on the Billboard 200 in January 2019. Back when the mixtape first dropped, he sat down with Billboard for an interview. When talking about the significance of the title, he said, "Like I am you, literally, I am you. I feel everything you going through. I feel you when you laugh, when you think something funny, but you don't think nobody understand why you think it's funny. I am you. I understand you know what I'm saying, and I feel what you feel. I am literally you, the same person. I relate to you. God bless me with that." It is interesting to listen to Melly's explanation because he appears to honestly believe that he is extremely empathetic and can put himself in pretty much anyone's shoes. By January 2019, Melly was back in prison, but he did manage to release his second mixtape from behind bars. We All Shine had 16 tracks on it and featured industry heavyweights like Kanye West, which just goes to show how much momentum Melly had gained as an artist. The crazy thing is, West was the one who reached out to Melly about working together. West even appeared in the music video for Mixed Personalities, proving just how involved he was in the project. Melly did end up slowing down somewhat with his releases in 2019, considering the fact that he was facing murder charges, but it was not enough to stop him completely. By the time March 2019 rolled around, news of Melly's murder charges had already broken. So it wasn't altogether surprising that his track Murder on My Mind went on to become his most streamed song, with over 900 million streams on Spotify as of June 2023. In November of that year, Melly had his biggest success with his debut studio album Melly vs. Melvin, which peaked at number 8 on the Billboard 200, including the track 223s, which landed at the 34th position on the Billboard Hot 100. After dropping his studio album, Melly went pretty quiet for about the next year and a half, usually just popping up to release a remix of one of his songs here and there. Then in March 2021, he made a comeback of sorts by dropping Thugged Out featuring Kodak Black, who was from Florida just like Melly. He dropped a few more singles in the weeks that followed, and all of it led up to his second studio album, Just a Matter of Slime, which featured notable artists like Lil Uzi Vert and Future, just to name a couple. The album featured a total of 12 tracks that were put together by using vocals Melly had recorded before his arrest in 2019. Debuted at the 11th position on the Billboard 200, but despite its strong opening, the critical reception to the album was pretty cold. The AllMusic review for the album in particular really highlighted the main issues with the album, saying, "The project features old vocals from the pre-2019 vault, and as a result, the album's features tend to take the main stage. Unfortunately, Melly's own vocals don't quite match the energy of his contemporaries, perhaps due to his lack of input in the final release, and as such, much of the album lacks the outlandish personality that made him so popular in the late 2010s. When combined with uninspired and sonically incohesive production, these tracks result in a lethargic layover tape rather than a second full album. The entire album gave the impression of existing just in the hopes of keeping Melly relevant while he was in court, as opposed to being a fresh creation for his fans to sink their teeth into. Legal troubles before double homicide charges. So, I have already spoken about Melly's first major run-in with the law when he opened fire near a high school. While he was convicted, his sentencing was pretty lenient. Melly spent a year in prison before being let out on probation. He didn't spend long on the outside, though, because he violated his parole and landed right back in prison. He wasn't behind bars for much time, though, spending just a few months in the clink before getting released in March 2018. If you remember from earlier, this was the parole violation where the state attorney read out lyrics from Murder on My Mind to send Melly back to prison. For context, this was around the time when the budding rapper was mostly focused on releasing singles, building up to his first mixtape, which dropped in August. This release from prison in particular is important for one major reason. Melly made the decision to move, citing his treatment at the hands of law enforcement as the main problem he was facing. In an interview, he spoke about the police in Indian River County. He said, "The police are very, very dirty and racist. They want to kill me. I had to get out of that environment." Anyway, even though Melly was mostly focused on his music after getting out in March, he could not resist falling into trouble once more. Melly had only been out for a couple of months before getting arrested in June for the possession of marijuana, possession of weapon or ammunition by a convicted felon, and drug paraphernalia in Fort Myers, Florida. Melly did not seem to be rattled by this arrest at all, citing his faith in God to guide him through. In an interview, Melly got all introspective and spiritual and said, "I sacrificed for this, but I'm no longer there. I only did that for the rap game. They was telling me I was stupid when I was in the streets sacrificing for this, but I think they should have listened to me." Regardless of his faith, Melly did not seem to learn his lesson here, because he marked the new year by getting arrested for the possession of marijuana once more on January 3rd, 2019, and spent 25 days in prison. This would mark Melly's final run-in with the law, before he would be charged with the double homicide that now has his name all over the news.
Two men are in jail this morning, including an up-and-coming Florida rapper. Both men are charged in a double murder. Police are saying the two staged a crime scene to make it look like a drive-by shooting.
He would be charged alongside fellow rapper Courtroom Henry, also known as YNW Melly. Melly wasn't a big name in the industry like Melly was, but he has a major role to play in this story, and he's going to pop up again, so keep him in mind. He also had his fair share of run-ins with the law in the past. In 2016, when he was just 17 years old, Melly was charged with fleeing from deputies at an attempted traffic stop. Melly had jumped out of his vehicle and tried to escape on foot before being tackled and taken down. Just 3 months later, he was also charged with possession of a firearm as a minor. The story about their legal troubles unrelated to those killings doesn't end there. A couple of weeks after Melly's trial started, both Melly and Bortland were named as two of the suspects in the shooting of an Indian River County off-duty sheriff's deputy Gary Chambliss back in 2017. According to Vero News, a source claimed that Jamel Demons, also known as YNW Melly, and Courtroom Henry, also known as YNW Bortland, were at the scene of the shooting of longtime deputy Gary Chambliss was common knowledge in the Gifford community. Now keep this in mind, and let's go back to something I mentioned mentioned just a little while ago. When Melly got out of prison in 2018, he moved because he claimed Indian River County law enforcement was being racist and making his life very difficult. While as of right now, it remains unclear if Melly was actually involved in the murder of the sheriff's deputy, one thing is very clear: there was absolutely no love lost between the rapper and Indian River County law enforcement. The crime and the arrests. Back in October 2018, Melly Bortland and two of their old friends, Anthony DeAndre Williams, also known as YNW Sack Chaser, and Christopher Thomas Jr., also known as YNW Juvie, were set to appear in a music video together. But something happened over the course of the night, and Sack Chaser and Juvie died as a result of an alleged drive-by shooting. According to reports, Bortland drove the two victims to Memorial Hospital Miramar early in the morning on the 26th, but it was too late. A spokesperson said they arrived with multiple gunshot wounds. They were dead already. The fact that Melly's phone signal proved he was with the victims 15 minutes before only Bortland arrived at the hospital with the bodies raised red flags for the prosecution. Jumping forward in time a little bit, a documentary focusing on YNW Melly was released in December 2019. It was shocking because the documentary showcased the close-knit relationship between Melly, Bortland, Sack Chaser, and Juvie. A line from Melly in particular would prove to be harrowing when he said, "We ain't never had no fear. You can't hang around us if you got fear. Because we know what we doing, you know what I'm saying? And that's why we so tight." Melly was tight with Juvie, even going to the extent of referring to him as his day one. Both men grew up together and went to the same school. The documentary even featured them reminiscing over listening to Chris Brown when they were children. Melly would give some insight into the friendship the four men shared, saying, "We got the same brain, me and all my..." had the same dream growing up. In the wake of their deaths, Melly was understandably distraught. On October 27th, he took to his Instagram to pay his respects, saying, "They took my brothers from me over jealousy. I know y'all watching over me." The they Melly is referring to is potentially whoever he believes was behind the drive-by shooting. But see, this is where things get interesting, because just 3 months later, Melly and Bortland were arrested for having committed the killings themselves. On February 13th, 2019, the police said that forensic evidence gathered as a result of the investigation revealed that the drive-by had been staged and that Melly had been the one to shoot his friend. In light of this evidence, Melly turned himself in that same day, while Bortland had been arrested in Texas and extradited the previous day. Melly did take a moment to make an Instagram post about what was happening, though. He said, "Couple months ago, I lost my two brothers by violence, and now the system want to find justice. Unfortunately, a lot of rumors and lies are being said, but no worries, God is with me and my brother, Bortland." By this time, both men had already been indicted by a grand jury. Melly and Bortland both faced first-degree murder charges, while Bortland was also charged with 2 counts of accessory after the fact, leading up to the trial. A lot went down before Melly and Bortland's case finally got underway. After their arrest in the second week of February, public court records proved that the investigators launched into more details that did not paint Melly in a positive light. Law enforcement referred to phone records that proved Melly had been present at the scene of the crime. Not only that, but they also referred to crime scene and autopsy reports, claiming that Melly had been inside the car when he shot down Sack Chaser and Juvie. The bullets that were on the outside of his car had been staged in an effort to misdirect law enforcement investigation. About 10 days after this information was revealed, Melly officially pleaded not guilty on March 6, 2019. 6 or so weeks later, Florida prosecutors dropped a bombshell when they began to file paperwork seeking the death penalty against the rapper. In the months that would follow, Melly's younger brother, YNW B. Slime, would release his single Free Melly, YNW Melly Tribute, and Melly would drop his album Melly vs. Melvin in November 2019. There wasn't much going on in terms of his case during this time, but things would begin to ramp up over the next couple of years. In April 2020, Melly would end up getting COVID-19 and requested a restricted release from prison, but would see his request denied by the judge. Interestingly though, Bortland would be granted house arrest in May, despite having been brought up on the same charges as Melly. In a statement released by one of Bortland's lawyers, he would specify that Melly will remain in prison until the trial, while tweeting, "Jamel Demons, aka YNW, Melly's co-defendant, Cortland Henry, aka YNW Bortland, was granted bond and house arrest. Melly remains in jail until trial. The victim's family understands the release but does not agree with it. They hope for full justice and safety of all witnesses." That wasn't all though, as the lawyer would also share images of the court's documents outlining the conditions of Bortland's house arrest. The documents would read, "The defendant's bond shall be secured by collateral in the form of real property and or other tangible personal property, having sufficient net asset value in excess of $90,000. Bortland being released even on bond was certainly strange, but a more recent report from January 2023 could shed some light on why it happened. Allegedly, audio has emerged where Bortlen has spoken to law enforcement about the night of the shooting, stating that he was just driving the car, trying not to get hit. This is definitely not good for Melly, because if this recording is accurate, then Bortlen has essentially thrown his friend under the bus. It also lines up with what the police have been saying all along, that Melly was the one who shot down his friends, regardless of what might have happened. Bortlen made the most of being granted house arrest, releasing his first piece of music since 2018, which includes the lyric "Free Lil Melly." Things would get even more complicated for both defendants in October 2020, though, when the families of Sack Chaser and Juvie would file a wrongful death suit against them. The lawsuit alleged that there was a lot of tension between the four men because of a large sum of money coming in, and them not being able to agree on how that money would be distributed. Sack Chaser's lawyers would specifically state, when there are less people splitting up the prospective money, the people on the receiving end will get more. In the months that followed, Melly released his second album, Just a Matter of Slime, and Bortlen managed to get arrested for violating the conditions of his house arrest by going to a strip club. He would be re-released about 4 months later, though, because a judge would state that while he did violate the conditions, he did not commit any fresh crimes during that time. Again, this leniency feels a little suspicious. February 2022 would see Melly point the finger at a couple of guards who threatened to physically hurt him. In addition to isolating him from other inmates, Melly also had his phone privileges taken away. Most of the year would be focused on the possibility of seeking the death penalty in Melly's case.
The Broward State Attorney's Office plans to seek the death penalty against rapper YNW Melly for the deaths of his two friends.
After prosecutors stated that they were seeking the death penalty back in 2019, a judge would remove it from the possible list of punishments on July 6, 2022. According to court documents, Melly's lawyers were able to exploit a rule in Florida's criminal procedure. The rule stated that the prosecution had to notify the defendant of its intention to seek the death penalty and that the notice needed to be filed with the court within 45 days of arraignment. That did not happen in Melly's case, so there goes the death penalty. The prosecution would not take this setback lying down, though, and they tried to get the death penalty back on the table by indicting Melly for the purpose of benefiting, promoting, or furthering the interest of a criminal gang. Despite this new indictment, the prosecution would fail, as they did not file a new notice of intent seeking the death penalty. Things would maintain their status quo until November 2022, when an appellate judge would overturn the decision, making Melly eligible for the death penalty should he be found guilty of his crimes. Melly's lawyers would take this up with the Supreme Court of Florida, but the decision would be upheld. Around this same time, Melly's mother would also be brought in for questioning regarding alleged witness tampering when things would go south. According to the rapper's mother, she had been granted full immunity for her cooperation, but was surprised at her home with a search warrant for her phone. According to the warrant, the phone was potentially used as a means to commit a crime and was suspected of being directly linked to a felony. Melly's mother said that the detective with the warrant became aggressive and forcibly took the phone, bending her fingers so far back she needed physical therapy. With the death penalty now an option, jury selection for the trial would begin in April 2023 and would be overseen by Broward Circuit Judge Joseph Murphy. About 7 weeks later, the trial of YNW Melly would begin with opening arguments on June 12, 2023. And well, you know the rest. Despite causing so much grief and pain to Juvie and Sack Chaser's families, the focus of the trial, at least in the media, remains solely on Melly's behavior. Whether that is by design or indicative of the rapper's more disturbed psyche remains to be seen. And that's our video. If you enjoyed it, check one of these out too. I'll catch you in the next one.